Hi everyone. This is a brief tutorial meant to help you with phase one of your PAT. This is the most challenging portion for most students. As we know, getting started is always the hardest part. So I'll try to provide some brief information that will kind of fill in the blanks from the written information that you have. I know that there is a lot of information to read. You still need to read it. This is not meant as a replacement for that or to cover all scenarios. In phase one of your PAT, you will use contextual knowledge that you gain to identify and describe one writing trait goal for your student. The goal of this entire project is to help a student improve their writing abilities. Because it is a brief unit, you will be limited in how much progress the student can make. Therefore, you should be focusing on one writing trait. You'll be providing 2 lessons to the student. Those 2 lessons should focus on key qualities of the writing trait that you have chosen. The second lesson is an extension of the first, and the student will continue to apply this knowledge so that by your post-assessment, you should be able to see some improvement. To design your phase one, you need to find background information about your student that will support your goal that you create. You must demonstrate appropriate goals for your students, knowing what their age and abilities are, and the contextual knowledge of their learning situation. There are many factors to consider as you start collecting contextual information. This background information helps you to prepare appropriate instruction for your student using the resources that are available to them. As we know, in this ever-changing world of education, things are changing more quickly than ever since March 13th when schools shut down for COVID. Now, one of the things that we'll need to consider is, are these students learning remotely or face-to-face? This will determine how you deliver instruction. It's understandable that that might be confusing to you if you are not in a situation where you will be directly working with students because of coronavirus restrictions. We are simulating an experience, but you will need to look for the school name on the internet, look at their school website, and try to find their plan for learning currently. Consider what the students are dealing with in that type of a learning situation. Look at the grade level that your student is in. You should have chosen a student from the list that was provided within the course materials. Is your student going to be using an iPad, a laptop, or paper and pencil packets to write? If your student is in kindergarten, is it practical to expect them to be able to draw pictures electronically? How will you have them work, and how will you include technology in your coursework? Everyone in your lessons will be expected to use technology. So this is a consideration that you need to think about from the very beginning. You should have started already collecting background information on your school. Background information about your student has been provided to you, so you shouldn't have to look that part up. Let's look at some more information that you'll need for phase one. Let's consider why contextual information matters. You're not just gathering background information on the student you're teaching, but also on their conditions of learning. This includes the programs from the school district. There are several websites that are included within the PAT instructions. Please use them to gather as much background information as you can. The information shown on this page comes from the PA Ready scores for a school district in Washington County, Pennsylvania. This lets us know whether the current programs the district provides are meeting the students' needs. By providing this information, we can decide whether the students are showing growth because they're being scaffolded in their learning. Remember that even if you have a kindergarten student whose scores are not directly reflected here, every student who was tested and is part of this study was once in kindergarten and provided that instruction through the years in that school district. This provides a well-rounded picture of your student as well as the teaching environment that's available. Here are some other school statistics to consider. What is the learning environment in which the students are learning? We discussed this a little bit earlier. Are the students learning in the classroom or are they learning from home? What are the types of resources available to each student in the school or at home? This can be technology, textbooks, workbooks. What are the grade levels in the school building? Is this a K-5 building? Is it a K-2 building? A lot of schools are different, so check that out. Make sure that you state the name of your school district clearly and its location. If you can find out how many classrooms are in the building of each grade level. If your student is in second grade, how many second grade classrooms are there? A lot of this information can be found on a school district website, and it might not state clearly there are 5 classrooms of second graders, but there will be listed the number of classroom teachers for that grade level in most cases. So use that as part of your background information. Also, look at the diversity of the school population. You can find this through many of it might be on the district website or also through the state websites where you were provided links in your PAT overview. Consider whether this district is in a rural or urban setting and the socioeconomic status of the student population. You can figure this out by looking at the percentage of students who get free and reduced lunches. If you have a high percentage of students receiving free or reduced lunches, then you probably have a very low socioeconomic status for most of the students. You can record this information in the chart that's provided within the PAT format, but remember to write your information in paragraph form for your report. You will not be submitting the chart as part of your report. It's merely a note catcher of types for you, so you can use that. By now, you should have gathered all of the contextual information that we talked about because that was part of last week's assignment in your learning modules. Moving forward, You should be selecting a student from the list within this week's module, that same student who you chose last week. The writing sample for that student is provided. This is an advantage for you because normally students who go into a field experience have never met the students they'll be working with and really don't know when they write this phase one what they'll be facing as far as the students' writing abilities. In your case, you will be using the 6+1 writing traits to assess the student writing sample that you have been given before you finish writing your assessment plan. After you have evaluated that lesson, you should have formed a chart that lists the score for each of the 7 traits, 6+1. Based on those results, please look at the lowest score. This might be more than one column. So choose the score that you believe you would like to focus on for the purpose of these lessons. You are not to choose conventions or presentation in this case. List those scores, but do not plan to teach them. Instead, you will be focusing on one of the other traits. You'll also be identifying a mode of writing. When you look at the student writing sample, that should help guide you. Did the student write a narrative, an expository, or a persuasive piece? You can choose any of these modes, but your main focus will be on the writing trait. Remember, you are not teaching how to write a narrative. You are not teaching how to write an expository. You are not teaching how to write persuasive. You are teaching students how to include voice or sentence fluency or organization or ideas or word choice in the writing that they have done. It may take the format of a narrative, expository, or persuasive, and that's the form of writing that they will be improving upon. But the lessons must focus on one of these traits. Based on that, you need to then identify a learning goal. Your goal, once again, will focus on the writing trait. Which writing trait are you hoping that the students will improve? Write a rationale for that goal. And then go to the Pennsylvania Common Core State Standards. Identify the grade appropriate standards for your student. If your student is in 3rd grade or 4th grade, you will be required to also include the assessment anchors that apply. I want to caution you that you should be choosing writing standards, not reading standards. Keep in mind that this is a writing lesson. A lot of students make this mistake because you are taking another course simultaneously that focuses on teaching students to read. Those are the reading standards. Writing standards are separate. We looked at those in an early module during this course. Please use the writing standards for your PAT. Once you do that, you will be setting up your learning objectives for your student. Draft your learning objectives that you plan to address in your lessons. You have your pre-assessment writing sample already, So you should not have to revise these later. I know that the phase 1 instructions talk about revising later, but because you are being given the writing sample up front, you will be using that and being able to set your objectives clearly from the beginning. Now that you have completed your background information, you should be able to move forward by designing an assessment plan for your students. In the assessment plan, you will determine how you will gauge student learning. Your first assessment, of course, is the pre-assessment, also known as the diagnostic assessment. It's diagnostic because you are determining your students' abilities through this first assessment. You will need to describe how that assessment will work. This includes a writing prompt for your student and exactly what that will look like. This is not the lesson plan itself, but an overview of what that lesson plan will entail. How will you assess your student for the pre-assessment? You will also need to include 2 formative assessments. Each one of these will go into your middle lesson plans, the 2 lesson plans where you're actually teaching the skill. This can be an activity that you do during the class instruction and how well the student performs. So, for example, in your textbook, Teach Writing Well, How to Assess Writing, Invigorate Instruction, and Rethink Revision, Ruth Cullum gives examples of different types of activities. If you choose to do, for example, the activity on page 136 called Sentences Alive, the student's ability to perform during that task, you would keep information on, and that would be considered your formative assessment. You may use a checklist. A lot of students say, I want to use a checklist for my formative assessment. If you say that you want to use a checklist to see whether students are performing well on Sentences Alive, then you must create that assessment and include it as part of your assessment plan. So any assessment that you are using will be copied into this initial assessment plan. This includes the 6+1 traits scoring guides. So backing up to the diagnostic assessment, you will include copies of the scoring guides because that is how you will assess your students on each trait for the diagnostic assessment. During the formative assessment, you can use another means, and it can be, as I said, the activity and their performance on that activity. But however you are assessing their success, you must create that assessment and include it as part of the plan in phase 1. Your summative assessment will measure student growth in the trait that you have identified. And so for your summative assessment, you will give an overview of how the student will be assessed in their writing. And you must include your scoring guide for that particular trait. So you will just copy and paste the trait. If I were doing sentence fluency, I would go to that scoring guide and I would copy and paste that into my phase 1 to show that this is what I'm using to assess my student. But I'm also including a description of what the summative assessment will look like. What will my student be doing? So what are they doing? What tool am I using to assess? You must include those in this assessment plan. So you'll need one for the diagnostic, two formative assessments, and one summative assessment. Phase 1 of your PAT outlines lesson plan 1, which is your diagnostic assessment plan. You are not expected to turn that in this week as your phase 1. Phase 1 is merely the contextual information and the overall plan for your assessment and instruction. You will not be including the next part, which is your pre-assessment administration results and analysis and lesson plan 1. Those are due the following week. So once you finish with your contextual information, use the information from this week's module on mentor texts to start preparing your lesson plans moving forward. But they are not due with the contextual information and the overview of your assessment plan. Those two pieces make up phase 1. Please pay close attention to the formatting. Headlines should be as designated, subheadings as designated within the assessment plan that is written. Next week, you will begin writing lesson plans. That should be it for phase 1. I hope this answers a lot of the questions that you had. Please email me if you still are unsure. Make sure that you're asking specific details so that I can provide you with as specific an answer as possible. Good luck, everyone. I know you'll do a great job.